Imagine being a young princess, standing inside a cold stone chamber, knowing your entire future depends on something you cannot control. In medieval Europe, queens were more than royal brides. They were symbols of power and alliances between kingdoms. But before marriage, there was one strange and shocking tradition they had to face: a test of purity. Why did this happen? Why were these young women put through such stressful rituals before becoming queens? Today, we'll uncover the truth behind these practices, where myths, politics, and fear combine to create one of history's most controversial traditions. Stay with me, because the stories you're about to hear will completely change the way you think about royal weddings in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, people believed that a queen's character and virtue could determine the strength of a kingdom. Purity was considered a sign of honor, loyalty, and trustworthiness. For kings and royal families, it was also tied to the question of heirs, future rulers who would inherit the throne. Many believed that a queen should be completely untouched before marriage to ensure that the royal bloodline remained pure. These ideas might sound unfair today, but back then they were accepted as absolute truth. This belief gave rise to traditions that were not only uncomfortable, but also deeply stressful for young brides who were often just teenagers, far from home, and preparing for a life they didn't choose. Before a royal wedding, some families held special ceremonies to show that the bride was virtuous and ready to become queen. In certain courts, older noblewomen or trusted attendants would supervise preparations and verify that the bride followed traditions of modesty and honor. These rituals were less about science and more about reputation. If rumors spread that a bride was not virtuous, it could destroy an alliance between two powerful families. This made the entire process frightening for young women who knew their future, and sometimes their lives, depended on what others believed about them. It was not about romance, it was about politics, image, and control. Even after the wedding ceremony, the expectations didn't end. People in medieval courts often placed enormous pressure on newlyweds to prove that the marriage was complete and proper. This pressure came from a misunderstanding of biology and traditions that had existed for centuries. If everything went as expected, it was celebrated as a sign of good fortune for the marriage. If not, whispers could start and scandals could erupt, putting the queen in a very difficult position. All of this added even more stress to an already overwhelming moment in a young woman's life. The biggest problem with these traditions was that they were based on myths rather than facts. People didn't fully understand human anatomy, and they often assumed things that simply weren't true. For example, they believed there was one clear way to tell whether a woman had been with a man before marriage, but science today shows that is not always the case. This lack of knowledge turned ordinary events into matters of life and death for these royal brides. It shows us how dangerous false ideas can be when they are combined with power and politics. Unfortunately, these traditions were sometimes used as weapons. If a king wanted to end a marriage for political reasons, claiming that the queen was not virtuous could be an excuse. This was especially true in courts where alliances changed quickly. Famous rulers like Henry VIII of England questioned the honor of their wives when it suited their political goals. In many cases, it had nothing to do with the truth and everything to do with gaining power or control. For royal women, this meant living in constant fear of rumors and accusations. Today, we know that there is no scientific way to prove a person's purity. The beliefs of the past were based on guesses, tradition, and a lack of medical understanding. But in the Middle Ages, these ideas shaped the fate of queens and princesses. Entire dynasties were built or destroyed based on these myths. This shows us how far society has come in understanding fairness, equality, and science. But it also reminds us how easily misinformation can control lives. Some of the most famous queens in history were affected by these traditions. Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, was questioned for years about whether she had been truly eligible to marry him. Isabella of France also faced enormous pressure as rumors spread about her personal life. These women were not just queens. They were individuals who had to navigate impossible expectations while carrying the weight of entire kingdoms on their shoulders. Now imagine being a 14-year-old girl, taken from your family, sent to a distant land, and told that your honor would decide the future of two nations. These queens were not living fairy tales. They were living under constant scrutiny and fear. Every move they made was judged. Every word they spoke could start a scandal. Behind the golden crowns and beautiful gowns were young women who just wanted to survive. Thinking about their reality makes medieval history feel less like a story and more like a human struggle. Looking back, we might wonder, how could such practices exist? But history teaches us how societies can create unfair rules based on tradition, even when those rules have no real evidence. Thankfully, these tests have no place in the modern world and are widely condemned today. Still, the idea that a person's value should be based on myths is something we must always challenge. So next time you hear a story about a royal wedding from the Middle Ages, remember the truth behind the scenes. And if you want to hear even darker secrets of royal history, stay tuned, because the next story will surprise you even more.